Hi, Sally Walker here, your hormone and slow age expert. So if insulin is the major bad guy, if insulin is the major hormone for controlling how much fat you can burn, how do we then control insulin? Well, on paper it's very simple, and there is really only one way to control the need for insulin, and that's by controlling your blood sugar. So, as I said, very simple on paper, and there is a nice article in the blog this time about how we control insulin and how we control blood sugar. But just let me give you some tips or some ideas of what it's all about. So to control blood sugar, so first of all, what is blood sugar? It is glucose. So that's the first thing, okay? So we want to have that in our mind rather than the word sugar. We want to have the word glucose in our mind, because when we look at foods, that becomes very important. But the very first thing, which is the most important thing for you all to do, is know what your blood glucose levels are. Okay, so if you're not testing your blood glucose levels, you have no idea, because we can't really feel it. The only time we feel maybe a challenge with our blood glucose is if it goes low. Yeah, so we even say, oh my goodness, my blood sugar's dropped. Yeah, so we know when it goes low, but we don't know when it goes high. And high blood glucose is going to increase the production and need for insulin. Okay, and the symptoms for high blood sugar are not sort of clear well, they are clear, but we don't necessarily interpret these symptoms as being high blood glucose. So things like being very thirsty, so you're drinking water all the time and then you're peeing all the time. So you don't necessarily associate that with that you're having a blood glucose problem, but that is one of the most common. So if you are a person who has a lot of need for drinking water all the time, or drinking something, and you're then peeing all the time, then you definitely need to get your blood glucose levels checked. Now, as you all know, if you've listened to some of looked at some of my other blogs, measuring blood sugar or blood glucose levels is one of those tests you should be doing basically every day at home. This is a big indicator of your health level, your general health level. So you want to get yourself a little blood glucose monitor. They're very inexpensive. You can buy them online, you can buy them in the chemists, and you want to start looking at your blood glucose. So there is articles in this blog and in the other blog called Measuring Health, telling you how to do these things. You could also, if you have enough money to buy one, because they're quite expensive, but you could buy a continuous glucose monitor, which is a little sensor which is put into your skin, and it will monitor your blood glucose or measure your blood glucose levels all day long. This is an amazing way to do it. It's a wonderful product for people with type 1 diabetes especially, but for everybody who is a bit of a nerd about their blood glucose, sports people for example, this can be a wonderful gadget to have. Okay, but in some way or form you need to monitor your blood glucose. You need to know, is it somewhere between 4 and 7 millimoles a litre? Does it go above 7? Does it go below 4? You'll know when it goes below 4, but does it go above 7? How long is it above 7, etc.? There's lots of patterns that we understand today, but you need to know, okay? Because if you have a challenge where it is above 7 and it's most of the 24 hours a day above 7, then you definitely will be overproducing insulin, and you're definitely going to be storing fat, and you will have challenges burning it, okay? So that's the most important thing. And then the next thing is, well, how do we control this blood glucose? How do we get it to be sort of somewhere between 4 and 7, or I like between 5 and 6.5 millimoles a litre, as much as possible? It's always going to come up at one point, but how often does it do that? How long is it up over 7, etc.? Why did it go up over 7? Was it food? Was it exercise? Was it stress? What made it go up? And then can you change some of these things? This is some of the things you want to be looking at, okay? But to control blood glucose, you've got to look at your foods. You've got to look at things like how much carbohydrate you're eating, because all carbohydrate ends as glucose. So don't kid yourself about, oh, I'm not eating sugar. Remember the most important word is glucose, not sugar. Because as soon as you start looking at the sources of glucose, then you realize that your breads and your pastas, your rice and your root vegetables and your pulses and things like this can be your worst enemy. That you've been eating and avoiding the sugars, but now you've just been getting as much glucose anyway. So have a little look at that article so you get to know what I'm talking about here, because that's really important. Things like time restricted eating is really, really good. Science is definitely clear here, pinpointing that people who restrict the numbers of hours in which they will eat food down to 6, down to 8, possibly even down to 10 hours within the 24-hour period actually do have a much better blood glucose reading, much less insulin's produced, etc., etc. So that's a really good thing to do. Exercise is also on the list, and exercise is really important because it helps. So muscle tissue is really hungry for glucose, and doing exercise which will build your muscle tissue, focus on that especially, will actually create more hungry little cells for glucose. And also doing exercise actually increases the effectiveness of getting the glucose into the cells without necessarily having to produce more insulin. Very interesting, that one. So have a look at that article. And then the last thing on the list, which most people overlook or do not maybe realize, is, and this is possibly the worst problem of all, is the hormone cortisol. So the hormone cortisol is responsible for lifting, maintaining blood glucose levels, and it does this by breaking down your muscle tissue, your bone tissue, your skin tissue to release glucose and then top up your blood glucose. And it does this 24 hours a day. This is what it's supposed to do. If you are eating or not eating has no effect on your production of cortisol. Well, if you have a low blood sugar, it's going to. So if you're not eating and that's the result, then you're going to be producing more cortisol. But in general, your cortisol production is on a 24-hour cycle. You can read all about it in that article, how to control insulin. And the other big reason for more cortisol is inflammation and an overactive immune system. So have a look at that article. It is very, very important, because the only way that you will control insulin is by controlling your blood sugar. And yes, you can. Happy hormones, happy life.